Hello and good morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I live and work within the traditional territories of the Kwanlundan First Nation and the Tonquaton Council. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Brianne Warner, the Executive Director for the Yukon Chamber of Mines, and I'd like to welcome you to Session 7 of our Geoscience Speaker Series. The difficult decision to cancel this year's Geoscience had us pivot to this online Geoscience Speaker Series, which we are offering free of charge to our registrants, thanks to our dedicated partners, Yukon Government and BMC Minerals, and our generous sponsors, Alcan Air, Air North, Archer Cathro, Hummingbird Mobile Health, Cobalt Construction, JDS Group of Companies, Newmont, NVD, Pelly Construction, Summit Camps, Invest Yukon, Metallic Group of Companies, SGS, Smalls Expediting, Sodexo, Northwest Tel, Tetra Tech, Whitehorse Gold Corp, Banyan Gold, Casino, CSR Management Inc., Ivor Yukon, Horizon Helicopters, Kluane Drilling, Minto Metals, Rock Haven Resources, SLR, AMG, Snowline Gold Corp, and Terrain Geoscience Inc. The Geoscience Speaker Series is an opportunity to share the successes of our exploration and mining industry from the past season while keeping us up to date on trends and industry best practices. It is important to the Chamber to ensure we continue to offer opportunities for industry to network and communicate their achievements and attract investments to the territory. As for a couple of housekeeping items, if you have any technical questions, please contact events@csrmanagement.ca. At the end of each talk, if time permits, we will offer a Q&A with our speakers. Please type your questions into the chat. If we cannot get to your question live, we will endeavor to follow up with you. If you hear any background noise, that is my 9-week-old son, Nash. Apologies. These sessions will be recorded and posted on yukongeoscience.ca. Again, special thanks to our sponsors and to our partners, BMC Minerals and Yukon Government. With that, I would like to introduce the Director and CEO for BMC Minerals, Scott Donaldson, to say a few words.
Friends and colleagues in the mining industry, I am very pleased to have been afforded the opportunity to make a few comments at the Yukon Geoscience Forum this year. BMC has enjoyed the privilege of supporting geoscience over the years, and we look forward to continuing to support what is an important annual event to our industry. Firstly, though, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the various First Nations here that have exploration and mining activities within your traditional territory. The relationships between miners and traditional owners are important. You are valuable and treasured partners in our industry, and I recognise and thank you for it. I would also like to thank and acknowledge the organisers and supporting companies that made Geoscience Forum happen this year. It has been a triumph in challenging circumstances, and you and the various presenters and participants should be proud of yourselves for delivering such a high quality product. The last 2 years has been very challenging for everyone in the world, and the delivery of this forum is a real achievement you should be proud of. During the COVID pandemic, the main driver supporting Yukon jobs and the Yukon economy has been mining and exploration, which continue to adapt and operate safely and effectively throughout. In Yukon, the mining industry is the largest employer outside of the government, and there is no other industry that is capable of taking up this role. Indeed, around the world, it is mining and exploration that is the most likely to provide economic opportunity for regional communities, and Yukon is no exception. We are all aware of the many links between our industry and First Nations and non-First Nations regional communities alike. This is not unique to the Yukon, but it is especially true in the Yukon. Modern relationships between mining companies and local communities are symbiotic in that they provide long-lasting and beneficial outcomes for both parties. Ours is an industry that leads the world in supporting regional communities, and I, for one, am very proud of that undeniable fact, and I hope you are too. In early 2021, the Canadian government issued a list of strategic minerals that they deemed are vital to growing Canada's clean, modern economy and achieving net zero carbon emissions over the next 20 to 30 years. Canada is primed to capitalise on the rising global demand for critical minerals, driven in large part by their role in the transition to a low carbon and digitised economy. Essential for renewable energy and clean technology applications like batteries, permanent magnets, solar panels, wind turbines. These minerals are also required inputs for advanced manufacturing supply chains, including defence, security technologies, consumer electronics, agriculture, medical applications, critical infrastructure, the list goes on. The economies that quickly secure a position in shifting supply chains will be well situated for long-term economic growth and prosperity. Yukon is a mineral-rich locality, and Yukon is stand to be in the box seat to reap benefits from a mining boom in these commodities over the next 50 years. Mining is a solution for climate change, and the mining industry is both a funder and a driving force behind the creation and adoption of new technology needed to combat climate change. And yet, unbelievably, it is an industry that is an easy target for detractors because we don't sell our message as well as we should. Conferences such as Yukon Geoscience are important forums for sharing our various stories, assisting collaboration between people and companies associated in our industry, and building on our continuous improvement in how we go about our business so that we can deliver better outcomes that benefit all Canadians. One of the big initiatives in Yukon in 2021 and through into 2022 will be the opportunity to revitalise the industry through a review of the various legislation that governs mining and exploration. Over the last 5 years, the Yukon has seen significant deterioration of the processes around assessment of exploration and mining applications. Processes that were designed to be fair, transparent, and to deliver fact-based assessment have been eroded. It seems more and more that the only group still following the rules is our industry. 5 years ago, a simple 30-day application process took 30 days and could be relied on to take 30 days. Now proponents are routinely reporting that the same process can take over 180 days. Now, project proponents and the funders behind us are often left bewildered and confused. The only certainty we have today is that the process isn't the process, despite what the legislation might say. How do we fix this? This initiative to review the legislation provides us all with a once-in-a-generation opportunity to put in place modern legislation that provides certainty for mining companies and the public alike and supports our long-term, vibrant and sustainable mining industry that we can all be proud of. It is important that our industry takes up the challenge to participate and be heard in the discussions around this matter, and it is important that government facilitate and commit to the industry's participation. If this doesn't happen, our industry will become a footnote in history, and the jobs and opportunities that you have all worked so hard to create and that we as an industry have provided to regional communities will be lost forever. We must not allow this to happen. Friends and colleagues, I urge you all not just to observe and comment on the process, but to demand and exercise your right to be involved and to be heard. Please do not sit in the back row on this issue. If you do, we will not get the outcome that we and Yukon deserves, and the Yukon will end up losing an industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I close by repeating my thanks to those that organised and worked towards the success of Yukon Geoscience despite the challenging circumstances. It has been very successful and you should be proud of yourselves. BMC looks forward to continuing to support the forum, and I look forward to your presence next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott Donaldson. For our first panel today, it is titled Pathways to Net Zero Mining in the Yukon with Honorable John Stryker, Minister of EMR, Paul Westfells, President and CEO, Western Copper and Gold, Chelsea Hamilton, Mining Engineer and Financial Advisor, SLR, with host Rick Corbin, Principal Hydrogeologist and Northern Operations Manager for SLR.
Thanks, Brianne. I'd like to start by recognising that we're broadcasting live from the traditional territories of the Tan Kwachan Council and the Kwanlin Dan First Nation. My name is Rick Horrobin. I'm the operations manager for SLR Consulting based here in Whitehorse. So we're here today to talk about pathways to net zero mining in the Yukon. Many of you will know that in 2020, the Yukon government published our Clean Future, a strategy for climate change. And that set out the target of a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and that's 30% reduction from 2010 levels. Mining's got a big part to play in that for two reasons. One, as we heard from BMC just now, mining can deliver some of the critical minerals that are required for the globe to meet the targets of greenhouse gas emission reductions. But also in the Yukon, mining produces some of those greenhouse gas emissions. About 10% of the territory's emissions come from mining. So we're very pleased today to have three distinguished speakers to discuss this topic. Minister John Stryker, Paul West-Sells, and Chelsea Hamilton. I'd like to ask each of you to just maybe give a quick 1-minute introduction for the audience. And Minister Stryker, if I could start with you.
Thanks, Rick. Hi, everybody. So I'm John, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, also Minister for Yukon Energy. My background is as an engineer, and in particular working on climate change for the past, well, it's now getting on to be decades, several decades. So I've worked for a long time to think about how we shift the energy economy. And in particular, when you have an industry like mining in the Yukon, where it can be 50% of the energy usage, depending on what level of activity we've got, then it's really an important question to talk about. And so I'm really excited to be here today to discuss with Paul and Chelsea. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, John. Paul, maybe I can come to you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So Paul West-Sells, President and CEO of Western Copper and Gold. As probably most people know, we're developing the Casino Copper Gold project up in the Yukon. And it's been interesting as we've developed this mine, the challenges that we have with an off-grid mine and a grid in the Yukon that's isolated. How do we achieve net zero? And I've got lots of ideas and lots of things to talk about with that. And Minister Stryker and I have talked about this as well, and so I'm really looking forward to sort of sharing those conversations with the audience here.
Thanks, Paul. And Chelsea.
Hi, my name is Chelsea. I'm a mining engineer with SLR Consulting's Mining Advisory Group here in Whitehorse. I've worked in the mining industry for about 8 years with experience mainly in underground gold mining. And I've also spent a few years working in the capital markets and equity research analysis on precious metal stocks. I'm someone who has struggled with the magnitude of climate change and tragedy in the world over the last, my lifetime. And over the last year and a half, I'd say I've been finding reason to be optimistic about the changes that are happening in the mining industry and the opportunities that are available now. So I share the sentiment that I think there's a lot of good things happening, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Chelsea. I wonder if I could start with you, actually, because you've got your experiences across the globe. So I wonder if you could just give us a sense of what net zero looks like in terms of global mining.
Yeah. Okay. So to put it into perspective from a high level, we know that mining contributes about 1/3 of the world's annual greenhouse gas emissions. And we also know that for us to collectively transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels and to decarbonize, we need new technologies such as electric vehicles, batteries, renewable power generation, and all of these things to replace our existing infrastructure. And these new technologies are driving the demand for critical metals. So it's kind of a catch-22. Because on the one hand, we want to protect our planet, the ecosystems for future generations, and we want to create sustainability in our economy. And on the other hand, we also want to protect our way of life So we need more resources and we have to increase our mining productivity substantially. So the mining industry is under quite a bit of pressure to find and produce critical minerals very quickly, knowing that many supplies will fall short within the next 5 years, while at the same time also decarbonizing itself. So this drive to decarbonization is having some very interesting impacts on the economic model for a mine. Historically, investors in mining have been a fairly uniform group. They understand that mines need a huge amount of money upfront. So these investors trust in the proven technologies and the proven processes, and they're not typically interested in change because the stakes are so high. However, in the last few years, we have been seeing a massive shift in the investor base. So new capital is entering the market that's usually attracted, that is actually attracted to technological advancements. And these investors are driven by ESG. They want to support global decarbonization and social equity. And they understand that we need to produce critical minerals. And these investors are now facilitating this massive change within the industry. So we're seeing money flowing now towards projects that produce critical minerals, that are located near existing renewable power sources, and that are supported by local communities and First Nation partners. So it's come to the point where most banks now are requiring emissions targeting, setting, and disclosure reporting, and with a clear pathway of how they're going to get there. So it's becoming increasingly more difficult to acquire funding if your project doesn't have a net zero target in sight. And in the Yukon context, I think this net zero mining up here will follow the same global trends with a focus on regions of existing infrastructure. And as time goes on, we'll start to see new battery technologies, mobile equipment options, renewable energy grids become available. But given our cold winters and geographic isolation and lack of current grid capacity, there will be some carbon offsetting in the short term as well. But I do think there's reason to be optimistic about the future of decarbonization in the Yukon, in the mining industry, and all industries up here. And I'm sure that John and Paul have a lot more to say about the Yukon perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say, John, I mean, you've been heavily involved in this for a long time, and I suspect have plenty to say on the subject. So maybe give us the Yukon context.
Sure. Well, a couple things. First of all, the Yukon, from an energy perspective, is islanded. So when we think about whatever we're going to do, whether it's new electric vehicles, if we shift the transportation economy across to electricity, we also have to be watching how we're going to increase our renewable capacity within the territory. And if we get into some really big projects, then maybe the thinking has to be how we connect with BC. But we really have to watch two sides of this: how we help mines to get towards net zero, and how we build up more renewables across the territory. A couple other things that I'll add just for the sort of the Yukon context. I mean, I think everyone understands that it's a large geographic area with very small population. So, you know, you've got a rate base and you have to be careful that you don't overload that rate base, meaning the population who's going to pay for it. So typically government and or mines will have to invest pretty heavily up front. So you really need that long lead time, as Chelsea is talking about. Our goal actually, Rick, for 2030 is 45% reductions, but we've said that mining should be intensity based, meaning if mining increases, then we have, you know, we'll set a target and then it will allow for that mining to increase. If it decreases, we can't cheat and say that's a reduction in emissions. So those are sort of the two sides of it. But ultimately, where we're heading towards is 2050 net zero. So that's, you could be intensity based or absolute, but at that point you're working to transition completely away. I think that this is going to happen, is happening. And so it isn't just that there's a challenge right now, there's also a risk if we don't do it, because we'll be behind in the industry. So I think that I think that the Yukon mining industry has always acquitted itself very well at being progressive, whether that's on environment, social, or governance values. And I think this is a challenge, as as we heard earlier from Scott in his video. But I think there's also opportunity here to make the transition.
Yeah, and we'll talk a bit about opportunity in a minute. And before we do, Paul, maybe you're looking at one of the potentially one of the largest mines in Yukon, and if I'm correct, and by all means correct me if I'm not, then the energy demand of the project is about what the Yukon is currently using. So a significant increase. So, I mean, what's your take on this from a mining operations perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple good points. I'll sort of start with something that both John and Chelsea sort of touched on is that we all know where we're going, and we're going to net zero at 2050. And Chelsea, you brought up, I really like the fact that you brought up, the idea that the investors are demanding that, and that's absolutely true. And particularly as you get larger, our partner right now, Rio Tinto, they have very, very clear targets on achieving, net zero over certain timelines, and intermediate sort of goals that they're going to hit as they get through that. As Minister Stryker talked about, there's those targets in the Yukon. The challenge I really see is, particularly for someone like myself, where we have a very, very large project off grid with a critical mineral. And, one of the things that I mean, back to a point that I saw caused me a bit of pause, Chelsea, is you're like, well, people are supporting projects that are really close to, an existing grid with lots of power. Yeah, you know what? There's not a lot of those projects. Like the big projects are in the north, because the north, there's a reason why the Yukon is seeing a lot of mineral exploration activity. It's because, we're the last frontier here a little bit, and so it's an undeveloped area. So what does that path look like for the Yukon? What does that path look like for emitters in the Yukon, such as ourselves? And it is, as a big free market person, I hate to say this, and it causes bones in me to sort of crunch up, but it is going to be a partnership with the government, because we are talking big infrastructure bits and pieces here that need both industry and the government, I think, to work together to achieve these sort of goals.
John, I mean, one of the Paul's obviously focusing on a really big scale project here, but and no offense, Paul, but there's other mining in the territory, and some of all of that has a part to play. So we'll talk a bit more about the challenges of infrastructure connection and things like that in a minute, but there are smaller mine operations and very small mine operations. So how do we what are the challenges and perhaps opportunities there?
Sure. Well, I mean, right now we've got 3 large mines operating, not as large as some could be, but we also have placer and we also have exploration. So when we start looking at the problem, we think of it in chunks like that, and exploration right now is subject to a lot of other ways in which it's sort of caught up in the general economy as we work to try and transition off of fossil fuels there. Placer, I think you need to think of it as a group, and because it's very specific. It's a bunch of operators at again different scales, but it's as much about materials management, and I think where we look, depending on the scale, is what are those first steps that we can get to, and I think that for someone like depending on the scale of the mining or the activity of the mining within the territory, we would look for those ways to do things like, say, through more renewables in our diesel or something like that, because you have to figure out how it's going to be when it's away from the grid. And when it comes to the larger mines, I think we should be working with them one-on-one, because they all have slightly different realities But like what I want to do is to try and make sure that we're working to assist them to bring down their energy costs as much as possible, or energy usage as much as possible, because wherever we save the need for energy, then we're ahead. And there's, we can see technologies coming on the horizon, and maybe Chelsea can talk about some of those, or Paul. So we understand that there are things that are coming, but, a mine needs to plan and get going from now and plan out. And so I think if we can be working with those mines early to try and say, how do we work to bring down your energy usage? That's number one. Number two would be, especially for these significant sized mines, we do need to get them on the grid. And then we've got another challenge where we need to make sure that the grid keeps up with that level of capacity.
We'll come back to that in a second. John, you gave me a fantastic segue into a conversation about technologies and what's really available. Now, Paul and Chelsea, I don't know which one of you would like to pick up on that, but I think it'd be useful just to get a sense of, what first maybe the challenges are, but what are the opportunities and what are the technologies out there that really are there now? We talked about small modular reactors and things, but I think the technology for that is a long way off. I did see on the news this morning that that cold fusion has been achieved enough to boil 50 kettles, but it's likely to be decades and decades before it's sufficient to really make a dent. So what's available now?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of talk about modular mining, so changing the instead of having a genset on site that uses diesel, maybe a genset that uses hydrogen, and you can produce the hydrogen via renewable energy from hopefully close by, or you have to truck it maybe from somewhere, I'm not sure yet, but it's very much in the early stages, and I think there's some promise in some of that, as long as it is created with renewables, of course. There are, when it comes to large scale mining, there is a really interesting challenge, industry-led challenge right now, led by it's BHP, Rio Tinto, and Vale, I think. It's called the Charge On Innovation Challenge. So they've put out a whole bunch of technical specifications to the industry, to the public. And I think they received something like, I don't remember exactly, 40 or maybe 80 EOIs from manufacturers and battery manufacturers. So they're planning to work together and come up with some kind of commercial haul truck, large scale haul truck that is battery operated and can run for an entire shift on one charge, and things like this. It's not ready quite yet, but it looks like they're targeting 2025 to 2030 for some kind of commercial availability of something like this. And it's a really great example of collaboration between manufacturers and the mines themselves, and multiple companies within the mining industry. And then, of course, power purchase agreements for renewable energy grids is another pretty promising thing, but I'm not really sure what that looks like up here. Paul, have you looked into anything like that?
Not, I mean, we have actually. I mean, I'll answer that and then I'll sort of add on a little bit. I mean, one of the things about the Yukon, I mean, when we started, going back, I'm not gonna, over a decade ago, we looked at all the options for power, and some of the things that make the Yukon, in particularly where we are such a great jurisdiction to mine in, doesn't make it a great jurisdiction actually to produce power. There's not a lot of run-of-river, there's not a lot of wind resource. We all know about the sun. So there are some challenges there, but just sort of continuing on some of the technology, particularly, I mean, underground mines have their own set, but I want to differentiate between greenhouse gases and energy, because you can run, I mean, the technology exists right now to run a 0 GHG mine at the size of Casino. However, it uses a lot of electricity, but you just electrify everything. So if you look at haul trucks, for example, there's a number of mines now around the world that run trolley assist on their haul trucks. And so most of you guys have been to Vancouver, you've seen the buses that they've got the, connected to the lines above it. Looks very, very similar. And that this is an in-place technology. This isn't a developing technology, it's there. Obviously, you can have, your light vehicle traffic that is battery powered. We've all seen that. The big shovels you see in pits are typically electric already. Obviously, all the milling is electric already. So, in terms of lowering the energy usage, the mining industry has always been driven for that, not because of greenhouse gases, but because for a project like Casino is 40% of the cost.
Sure.
So that drive has been happening nonstop. But the greenhouse gas part, it's the electrification. So then the challenge, and this is, as I've said, this is why it becomes a Yukon-based challenge, it becomes an industry government challenge, is how do we create an electric infrastructure which is green? And that, is I think, one of the key things that needs to, that we, why we're having this discussion now.
And interestingly, we've had a couple of comments in the chat, one from Kevin saying that electrification is the key, pretty much exactly what you're saying there, Paul. So we've touched on this already, this question around electrification and the fact that first off, some of the big mines are not connected, and second off, obviously the Yukon energy grid is not connected in itself, as you said earlier on, John. It's an island. So maybe this is a pretty large question, but what's the solution to that? Is it additional capacity in the territory, or is it connections to the grids? And if it is, then how do you make that happen in the timescale that is really required to meet some of these challenges?
Sure. Well, a couple of thoughts. First one is we need more renewables anyway, right? So we've got growth happening, significant growth happening around the territory, and just for many reasons, we need to expand our move. Like if you look at the Yukon, over half of our emissions are due to transportation. And so we got to shift that. And so that already means we need to increase the grid. And the moment when, if we do connect to BC, I'll tell you that one of the big motivators will be about that we would have a large mine coming on. And that would be one of the things that helps us to get there, because it's not cheap to connect to the BC grid. So I think that we're doing work, we have to do work, and we are doing work right now, regardless. But I also think that there are thoughts that we can have. Like, I was in a conversation yesterday with some of our energy modelers, and they were saying to me, well, the price of solar is still dropping. Well, we all know that solar is summer power and not winter power, and it's not firm baseload. But if the price drops enough and you are off grid, whether you're a placer mine or a big mine, then suddenly you could say to yourself, well, it's cheaper to put in a bunch of solar to take as much as I can for now and offset my diesel or LNG or whatever that other generation cost is, because it's cheap enough, and that starts to make sense. And then on top of that, if we get storage, whether that is through hydrogen or whether that is through longer life batteries or some other way that there's storage, right? Because that's one of the things that fossil fuels has been so great at, is it has stored, and then it's dispatchable energy when you need it. So those are all sorts of things that might form part of the future that we think about. And I think that what happens here in the territory is that we must increase our renewable energy. And then the question is how to right size it against the load that we see coming. And the toughest load to predict is when a mine will come on and how big that mine is and for what lifetime, right? Those are the big challenging questions in terms of load prediction against what we will try and get. And when Scott was talking earlier about the challenges around mining in terms of the regulatory side, which I totally appreciate what he's saying, it's also true for renewables. We also have this whole need to work diligently well up front in order to get renewables on stream.
So, thanks, John. Paul, I mean, John raised there the question of large banks of solar panels. I mean, how practical, as it stands at the moment, would that be for the operation that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is not very. I mean, you know, I mean, theoretically, I guess it would be possible, but you know, I mean, I think when we look at a project like Casino, and let's bring it down to brass tacks here, what we look at as short of connection to the grid, short of developing, you know, and again, short of the grid suddenly having enough power for Casino, which, you know, this is called passing the buck over to the government and saying, you know, I'll try that, John. You know, when we look at what I mean, where are we going? Like I said, we all know where we're going, the end, but we don't know is the path, and the path is going to be some switches. And so I think that one of the things that we're really excited about, you know, within our company is hydrogen. I mean, I think that, and to the point where we actually are speccing out, you know, our power plant, which right now is looking to use liquefied natural gas. We're actually, you know, developing it so that we can use hydrogen as an issue, and so or as another fuel. And I think that you're seeing, I mean, you know, it's actually too bad Scott isn't here, because he could talk about what they're doing in Australia. They're taking big bets on hydrogen. You know, I mean, just right next to us in Alberta, they're taking big bets on hydrogen as well. So I think you're going to see this move to a hydrogen economy. And back to one of the things that John brought up, you know, you need I liked your term there, John. It was a distributable energy. So something you can put on a truck to somewhere, and then there's my energy, and I can use it. You know, how do you make that low carbon? Well, hydrogen has no carbon, so there you go. And ammonia is, you know, which is related to that hydrogen idea as well, is I think something that's really exciting as sort of, you know, a stopgap to get us off. And then that's going to be backed up by, you know, and I think there's solar panels. I mean, there's some really interesting things in terms of geothermal as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, and I'll just wear my other hat here, which is as a person running an exploration right now company, there's some really exciting things in terms of battery-backed solar, as John was saying. I mean, and you know, it's maybe a little bit more upfront capital, but you know, you're getting these systems now which can run an exploration camp, you know, maybe run a placer operation. You know, there is, you know, you have to sharpen your pencil on it, make sure it all adds up. But I think that, you know, there's some interesting little things at that sort of lower level as well that you know, could really go great lengths to lower the carbon output of the Yukon.
So I'm hearing, and by all means jump in and correct me, but I'm hearing, you know, the smaller scale technologies there at the moment. We had a comment from somebody saying that, you know, to mentioning geothermal, also that SMR, small modular reactors, may not be too far away. So, you know, for perhaps some of the smaller scale, not that SMR are necessarily small, but some of the smaller scale mines, those technologies are there. The bigger scale, the challenge really is around electrification and connection to sufficient electricity grids. Somebody also asked the question, you know, to what extent is this just a financing problem? I imagine that, you know, that the answer to that is it probably is, in that if there was no restrictions on the money available, then a connection to BC would be achievable, and a connection to Casino wouldn't be a problem. I suppose, I mean, John, from your perspective in the Yukon government, I mean, it sounds also like there's, you know, there's technology there, there's a drive to make it happen. What do we need in terms, maybe it's a roadmap or strengthening of a roadmap that already exists, and to get away from, again, as somebody commented, this chicken and egg situation where we have, well, we can't afford to build a mine because it's going to use too much fossil fuels, so we won't, and then in that case we're not going to have there's no drive for a big infrastructure. Does that, what is it that we need to do to take that roadmap forward?
Right. Well, I think the first step from our perspective is that we want to set targets, because I think that the public needs us to establish that there is something that we're heading towards. And it's easy to say zero in 2050, but you've got to have a roadmap. And it's not that you need to have it for every day or every month or even every year, but you've got to be like investing in the infrastructure, which is going to help you to be able to get there. And mining companies, they need to know where we're heading, because you don't want to make an investment, that you're heading down a path and the government does a right turn on you, whether that is around legislation or whether that is around energy or lots of these different issues. So we need to give that roadmap, and we need to work with industry to develop that roadmap so that it's in front of us. And I think that's the first step. And I think that, as sort of Chelsea was referencing, we will use whatever the smart things are right now, because or as Paul has said, all mines work to reduce their energy. It's a huge cost, so it has to be. And so we will work with them, and part of some of that lens will be not just energy, but also emissions. And I think those first steps are the ones that are pretty obvious to us. I think, like, for example, renewable in diesel, things like that are where we might start. And I agree, small modular reactors are large from the Yukon perspective, even for a mine like Casino, they're still very large. So you might even go for the micro, ultra small, but I still think that from a regulatory perspective, that's still a long ways off. When I talk with other provinces, I say, well, let's see what you can do. Let's look at it. But I actually think that the cost of things like solar keeps dropping. So we need to be thinking, what's the price in 5 years from now? And as Paul says, if a couple of neighboring jurisdictions really do develop hydrogen and that infrastructure starts to develop well, great, we can transfer it here. So I think, but I think those are the next steps. I think the first steps are roadmap, working with industry, and starting to lay out a game plan, working with those technologies that we have right in hand right now. And then I think next steps will be which way does those technologies like storage, dispatchable or distributable power, those are the ones that we need to watch.
And Chelsea, maybe we'll come to you. This question about how we get there. I mean, you alluded to this earlier on around the fact that we need, we on the one hand, in order to really make a change, we need some of these critical minerals pretty quickly, really. Maybe you can give us some comments on that.
Yeah. So the supply graphs, if you look at, a lot of the critical minerals are due to fall short of demand within the next 5 years. So that's a pretty big problem, because, and I'm just speaking from like a global perspective, it takes on average from the point of discovery to production 15 to 20 years in most cases, in many cases. So if we need supplies in 5 years, but it's going to take us 20 years to regulate and permit a new project, then we're going to have some issues getting to net zero globally in our current way of life. So when it comes to the pathway, I think it's tough because the upfront costs are big, and in order to justify those costs, you need to have some assurance that it's going to pay off. So there's a lot of people wondering, a lot of minds wondering when they should jump in and start investing in these new technologies and these new processes. Because if they wait maybe 5 or 10 years, maybe these technologies will be a bit cheaper, and maybe they'll be a bit more efficient, and they'll get more money, more bang for their buck. But in reality, if you are really thinking about your carbon footprint, at least if you do spend a bit more money now, you are investing in the research and development of these technologies. And in the meantime, you won't have so much emissions. So in my opinion, I think at this point, we are in a bit of a race. We all want to protect our air, and we all have to make some investment. And I think we are seeing some new investment in the mining industry. So we still have our base mining investors, but we are getting new funds into the industry. So if you can make your project interesting and you can show that you're willing to take some risks on these new technologies, I think you would find some investors.
Okay. We've talked quite a bit about what the Yukon government can do in order to support this, and we've talked about what from Paul, what your perspective from what mining companies can do. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other stakeholders out there, and there's a whole bunch of other regulatory authorities. And maybe this is a question for you, John. But I guess, Paul, you'll be heavily involved in some of these conversations as well. And I'm thinking First Nations governments, I'm thinking some of the other federal government regulatory authorities and the general public as well. Question for you, John. What do we need to do in order to bring those groups along with us?
Oh, I think that the public is already there. Generally, I'm not saying everyone, and the public is not one uniform thing, as we all understand. But generally speaking, the public is asking us. I think, and so when I first took this role about a year ago, every mining company that I spoke with, we talked about environmental, social, and governance future, the ESG of the industry. And so I think it's there, and in particular, First Nation governments, I think just they really want to be there. But I see them as investing in renewables as well and looking for projects. And so that, I think that's the type of partnership that will work well with a mine. And so when I look at the community level, they want to see capacity building within their community. They want to see support for other things within the community that are not necessarily related to mining, but they want wellness within their community. And I think that they are looking for like they see the changes to our environment. And I mean, we don't need to look at BC or Australia or California to understand that climate change is happening here and that it's a risk. And in some ways we had a lot of flooding last year, and maybe we get some more this year coming. And right away, conversations that I have with community members, like I've been working on climate change, well, for over 30 years. And I've got people telling me, well, this is climate change. And I'm like, okay, great. So and they're, they want to do something about it practically to try and shore up against that. And we all, I think those of us in the industry or in government, we talk about the responsibility to reduce emissions, the mitigation side, but also how to adapt to the changes. But the public, they just see it all as one thing, right? How to respond well. So I just think that from whether it's other orders of government or whether it's the public, they will insist that we make this move. And I think they will be supportive if they see government and industry working responsibly to that goal.
So collaboration really is critical to this. Yeah. Paul, what's your view on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think John hit a couple of good points. I mean, this isn't an issue. I mean, sometimes the public needs to be convinced, and sometimes the government and industry needs to be convinced. This is a case where government and industry needs to be convinced of. I mean, I think the public is demanding, a low greenhouse gas future, and I think that the challenge is, and Chelsea touched on this earlier, is that if you unpack that, this is a global future. So this is a globally lowering our greenhouse gases. And so to globally lower the greenhouse gases, you need these critical minerals. I mean, the federal government came out with their list. I mean, so the federal government identified this. This is the list of critical minerals. Copper, of course, is one of those key critical minerals. So it is, I mean, it's a chicken and an egg to simplify it. But really what that says is that you need to put together the roadmap. You need to put together the plan. And it's sort of like, okay, we're going to do this step, and then we're going to do this step, and then we're going to do this step. And so there is putting together that, you know, that roadmap to get us towards this sort of 2050 you know, net zero, but along that can't just happen tomorrow. I mean, if it happens, if suddenly tomorrow you can't build a mine with any greenhouse gas emissions, then you have, you know, globally, then suddenly you have no carbon, no lithium, no nothing to achieve any new energy. So it is a challenge to sort of balance those things and put them together. It's not a huge challenge. It's just, I think, getting people talking, getting people sitting down, getting everybody working together to move it forward.
Okay, yeah. And so look, we've still got a few minutes left. Actually, we do have a couple of questions. That one of them, I don't know whether this is something for you, Chelsea, but one of the questions we had is, as Paul said, the federal government has published the critical minerals list, and somebody's asked the question, Julianne has asked the question, how do we ensure that those are targeted towards renewable energy technologies? I mean, I don't know what your take on that question is.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, because we are seeing industry end users calling for green products. So for example, Tesla, I'm sure many of you have probably heard, just last year put out a call for green nickel, because currently we know that most of the world's nickel is coming from Indonesia. That nickel comes with a very high carbon footprint due to coal-fired processing facilities down there. And so there hasn't been a really great new nickel discovery in many years. So now Tesla has gone out publicly and said in one of their earnings calls last year, mining industry, please go out, find me some nickel. If it's green, I will pay top dollar. So basically, he's talking about branding commodities. And that's, I think, an opportunity that we have in the mining industry right now. Yes, it will cost more upfront to build a mine that is carbon neutral or carbon free or negative even. It will take some investment in new technologies, and it'll take some risk. But if you are able to do it, you will be able to sell your product at a premium. And this is the case in a few other commodities as well. Yeah, that's my take.
Okay, so you think that that's what's driving it at the end of the day. The reason that these critical minerals are being developed is because they're being developed for those technologies anyway. So it's not just a question of will they be just siphoned off and used elsewhere.
Correct. And also there's taxation stuff going on in the European Union. They have introduced this carbon import tax. So anything that's imported, including products for battery manufacturing, lithium, stuff like that, whatever the carbon footprint is, as of 2026, you'll have to pay a carbon tax on that commodity. So those battery manufacturers are going out to market, and they're looking and they're willing to pay more for something that they know that comes from a green operation.
You mentioned tax there. I'm not sure whether in the last few minutes we have enough time to touch on whether tax is a valuable tool or a lever that federal and territorial governments have. But John, I don't know whether there's anything you'd like to comment on that.
Well, one of the things that I'll say is that if you are going to use market measures, and taxes is one of them, I hope what we're doing is putting that money right back in. So it's not tax to grow government, but rather tax to improve industry so that it is moving in a direction. And that way you send the price signal, but it stays right there within industry so that it's able to make that transition better. But yeah, I'll stay away from the conversation about tax for today. I think it's a great conversation and I'm not afraid to have it, but I think right now, what I'll say is that we want to work with industry to talk through what the best path will be to be supportive of this goal, right? I don't want to argue the goal. We need the goal, and let's work together to get there. And I'm happy to have a conversation about what ways work best with industry to assist them making that transition.
And that's where the collaboration comes in, where actually talking, and I know you guys, you two, John and Paul, talk to each other quite a lot, but that's where that communication really is key. So look, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to grant you a magic wand, and it's a magic wand that isn't an unrealistic magic wand, so you don't get cold fusion for nothing, I'm afraid. But if there's one thing, and I'll start with you, Paul, if there's one thing that you could change about the situation that you're in today that you think would really drive this pathway to net zero forward, what would be your thing that you would pick on, and why?
It's just like one of those magic wands where, you know, my first wish is to have 20 more wishes or something like that. In all those games. As I touched on before, I think that developing a robust hydrogen economy is going to be key for off-grid mines. It's going to be key for Northern Canada, and it's going to be key for the Yukon. It's something, and you know, touching on Chelsea's point about time. Let's talk about, sure, Magic Wand connected BC grid. Let's talk about how long that would take. I mean, John, if you had the $3 billion it's going to cost in the bank right now, it would still take over a decade to get that through the regulatory processes, agreements with First Nations, all these big challenges, right? You know, I think it took Site C 20 years. Admittedly, that's a big dam. It's not a transmission line. So I think that, you know, with a hydrogen, with a robust sort of hydrogen, you know, delivery infrastructure, that's something that could, if that was there today, you could, you know, you can have little generators running placer operations. I can run my entire operation off of that. That is something that could happen very, very quickly. And I think that's why I'm excited about it, is because it's something that is real. It's a technology that's almost there, and it is something that can be implemented quickly.
Thanks, Paul. Chelsea, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would second a few things that Paul just said. I do think that green hydrogen probably has a place up here. Yeah, the question of time is of the essence. It's too bad we can't turn back the clock and get.
You don't, I'm afraid you don't get
20 years ago.
machine.
Yes, that would be my magic wand.
Finally, John, we've got 30 seconds left.
Sure. Well, my thing is this panel. Like, so back in the late 80s, I was teaching climate change at university. And I don't know if Chelsea was born yet. And so today I've got an industry panel talking about that we're going to get there. And that's what I'm excited about. And so this conversation is what I think is the most, so my magic wand is this right here.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. So a lot to talk about there, a lot we've talked about. Thanks very much for your time. I'd just like to say thank you, Mr. John Stryker, Paul Westsells and Chelsea Hamilton. And thank you everyone for listening. If anybody has any other questions, then don't hesitate to get in touch. I will now hand back to Brian.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
John.
Rick.
Thank you, Minister Stryker, Paul, Chelsea, and Rick for that panel. Our next talk is involving ESG requirements in mining with John Mullally, Senior Director, Sustainability and External Relations for Newmont. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Brianne. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to share a few thoughts on evolving ESG requirements. Just want to acknowledge, first off, If you can't hear me or can't see the slides, please indicate, Brianne. I want to acknowledge that I'm in the Lower Mainland, coming to you from the nations of the coastal Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam Nation. Thanks to the Yukon Chamber of Mines for this opportunity to share a few thoughts from Newmont's perspective on environmental, social, and governance and the evolving trends. Excellent panel just now on the challenges of reaching net zero and the clearly investor demands in that area. Clearly targets are a big topic of conversation, both for territorial governments like Minister Stryker's and the Yukon, as well as companies, and I'll touch on that. So thanks, Minister Stryker, Paul, Chelsea, and Rick for that really good conversation. I think it's a good segue to my presentation on evolving ESG requirements and the challenge to certainly to meet net zero is a central challenge. I think one just important point today is that this trend is here to stay, and no matter your size of company, that I think it's important that we embrace the trend, and Newmont has been on this journey for quite some time, but I think it's important that we all embark and that we move to respond to these demands, societal demands. Investor side is important for sure, but societal and things that are happening across the world, that we move to respond and to lead in this area. I think the companies have always been leaders in this space. And it's also, I think, important to consider how our ESG focus as companies works in conjunction with regulations in jurisdictions, and in this case, in the Yukon, where if you think of it, environment, E, environment, S, social, G, governance, the UFA really in the Yukon means that the rights and the territory of First Nations in the Yukon and our collective action towards national reconciliation means that we probably need an I in the case of working here in the territory. So ESIG perhaps. And I think, again, Newmont, larger company, depending on the size of the jurisdiction or depending on the rules of the jurisdiction, depending on the size of the companies, I don't want to suggest that there's a one size that fits all for these requirements and how a company should respond to. But it's important that we keep in mind the reality of the places where we work, of course. So I think it starts with Newmont. It starts with our vision. So we're the world's leading gold company, and our purpose is to create value and improve lives through sustainable and responsible mining. That vision then is very much underpinned by values, and our values are linked to safety, integrity, sustainability, inclusion, and responsibility. And we are very much a values-driven organization. The commitment to those values definitely play out in the words and the behavior of our leadership team. And those values and vision give way to our sustainability policy, and that flows down into the standards throughout the business. And we'll get into some more details about those standards and how it plays out into our ESG approach. As I mentioned, #1 gold producer, recognized sustainability leader, proven operating model, and key here, a long-term track record. Last year, we celebrated our 100th year in operations. So the company has been around for 100 years, and I'll touch on it in a sec, but at least a good 30 of those years have been partly dedicated and focused on our ESG journey, and not certainly driven by challenge in specific jurisdictions across the world, especially in Uzbekistan, Peru, and Indonesia, which have prompted a lot of thinking in the 80s and definitely advanced our journey. So it's not in any way a fad. These are ESG evolving requirements around ESG, but it's something that's been top of mind for Newmont for 30 years. In terms of where we operate, you see on the right-hand side, world-class operations across those jurisdictions. So Argentina, Australia, Canada, Dominican Republic, Ghana, Mexico, Peru, Suriname, and the US. I'll show you the map here. And you see the coffee project, saddle project in the, I can't see the slides. So you see that I only got through 2 slides, and I'll just backtrack ever so slightly here. So these were the values on the left-hand side. So our values and our world-class portfolio, just to comment on the jurisdictions here. And then we were onto this map slide. So you see the coffee project and our newly acquired GT Gold project in British Columbia, as well as our operations in Ontario and Quebec, so Musselwhite and Porcupine and Eleanor. And then you see Australia, assets in Latin America, Africa as well. I'd like to take some time, as the title of the presentation suggests, this has been a journey for Newmont, starting well before 2001, really. It indicates that there's a range of issues here, and I've just kind of bolded a number of the key issues and initiatives that gave way across this timeline. So I don't want to have to go through, every single one here, but I'm happy to share these slides after this presentation if that's helpful, Anne, and you can get it along to the membership. All performance in these areas have really translated to a well-run business. So we really have seen, I think you see business improvements correlated very much with strong ESG practices. And the ones that I've bolded just to highlight here for the presentation, a founding member of the ICMM back in 2001. So bolded here in the top left of this slide. And the ICMM was founded on and remains very much focused on sustainability performance in the mining industry. And then in 2004, established a Sustainability and Safety Board Committee, as well as our first sustainability report was published all the way back in 2004. So that's already 18 years ago. In 2007, we had our first executive at the sustainability level. So the first chief sustainability officer was named in Newmont. And then all the way back in 2013, and this journey continues, of course, were targets for inclusion and diversity established at the board level, as well as at the regional levels. In 2015, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, there are lots of acronyms here, and I will call them out when I see them. But the DJSI, so the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Gold Industry Sustainability Leader from 2015 to 2020. Compensation, so another extremely important consideration, ensuring that performance, that compensation is really driving performance around ESG. So our safety and sustainability targets have been included in compensation plans since 2015. And then more recently, very aligned with comments in the previous panel, we set 2030 science-based targets and a plan for net zero by 2050. There are other here, but I think this really indicates, just how long this journey has been going, and the underpinning again is that vision around committed to creating value and improving lives through sustainable and responsible mining. If we take a look at where are the expectations in terms of the reporting now, you look at the 2020 sustainability report on the left and our 2020 climate strategy report on the right, and all of the reporting expectations that go into those reports. Just to give you a sense, so the standards and performance expectations inside our sustainability report include the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, which is quickly becoming the gold standard on climate reporting, the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act, which is an act the federal government put in force in 2017 or 2018, and it requires all payments to First Nations to be published. The ICMM performance expectations are another requirement that Newmont follows. We have the World Gold Council Responsible in Gold Mining Principles, as well as CDP water and CDP climate responses. And then additional reports associated with the climate strategy report are also here on the right-hand side. It's really just to give you a sense to sort of all of the ingredients and the reporting that's connected to our sustainability approach. But what about the performance? Because it's extremely important. It's one to think about reporting. It's another to ensure that performance is associated with that reporting. You know, there's a lot of dialogue out in the market about greenwashing, and I think it's when that sort of marketing and the side of things and a lot of discussion around the reporting becomes paramount and perhaps outweighs some of the considerations for performance. So this is the performance side in terms of very tangibly, what are we achieving on the ground? So it's energy and climate. These are all performance areas that are basically really defined by the materiality to our stakeholders on an annual basis. Water, which in some cases I think gets outweighed by energy and climate, but in many jurisdictions, you know, the water intensity of mining is something that is extremely important. So we look to achieve site level. We have site level targets to work towards water stewardship and working in the watershed, depending on the specific challenges, as well as achieving water efficiency and improving our water recycling rates. On the social acceptance side, which again, perhaps a little bit more challenging to measure, but our measures include that we need to respond to 100% of any of the complaints and grievances that come in through our various mechanisms. We're looking at root cause as well on the social side to understand sort of where those complaints are coming and what is causing that. We have commitments to, for example, First Nations, and we're tracking those commitments. Those are ones that come out of either commitments inside of agreements or commitments through regulatory processes. And as well on the social acceptance to implement human rights mitigation plans, things that are perhaps a little bit more relevant depending on the jurisdiction. In terms of other social performances on value sharing, thinking about targets, we have targets for local employment and local procurement. Really are the two primary vectors for delivering value and benefiting the communities where we operate. So focused on those particular areas and understanding where we are and how to improve. It's not just about that target when it comes to local employment and local procurement, but it's also, you know, what are the programs? How are we training and bringing local communities into the workforce? How are we listening to our Indigenous suppliers, for example, and kind of understanding their specific challenges, or also what are the specific needs that we have as a business, and how can the local suppliers address those needs? So again, it's a one bullet here, but there's a tremendous amount of work that goes between sustainability, external relations, our human resources departments, and our supply chain group to really bring that to life. Safety, of course, achieving zero fatalities and really focus through our fatality risk management system. And the last part, when it comes to measuring and measuring performance, looks at closure and reclamation and in the last stages of, which is extremely important to be focused across the entire mine life cycle. And ESG, of course, incorporates, you know, from the beginning all the way to the end. In this case, closure and reclamation, which again, when I think about the Yukon, I know that this has not always been, an area where the industry has been successful. So thinking about that, extremely important that we get that progressive reclamation happening as well before the mine closes, so that it's in a really good state to close when it's there, and that we're planning for, that closure throughout the life cycle. And then in terms, thinking about if after we have our performance, we are performing, then how are we measuring, right? So how are we holding ourselves accountable, and how are we ensuring, accountability to various voluntary third-party reporting programs. So we have our global standards verification. Those are our own Newmont social and environmental standards, and how those are verified. We also have compliance audits around the legal requirements and how we're complying to the law across all of the different countries where we operate. And then we look at the voluntary commitments, and the voluntary commitments are the ICMM towards sustainable mining from the Mining Association of Canada, World Gold Council, and how can we build all of that in. And this is, I think, a particularly big opportunity for the sector as it relates to, really finding a language that speaks to both shareholders, stakeholders, local communities, governments, and one that we can speak in a common language. Because when we have this alphabet soup of various different compliance programs, it becomes very difficult to look at one company versus another and to make any kind of sense of kind of what it all means. So this is a challenge that I know that ICMM, World Gold Council, and the Mining Association of Canada, amongst others, are looking into, and I think it's extremely important that we get that right. On the third-party assurance, so all of our annual sustainability report, our greenhouse gas inventory, so that'll be assured as well, World Gold Council, as I said, and then our internal processes around risk. And I think that this is going to be increasingly important as it relates to, especially around climate change. There are so many commitments, and just as the previous panel said, everyone's committing to 30% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. But how are we looking at progress towards those commitments, and how are we measuring progress, and how are we assuring that we're keeping ourselves accountable, and that way, rating agencies and investors can also keep us accountable. So to that end, our commitments on energy and climate, as I mentioned, 2030, it's a 30% reduction in combined scope 1 and 2. As well as 15% reduction from scope 3 by 2030, and a goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And we've elected to go through the Science-Based Target Initiative. And again, we've last year published our first climate strategy report, which is aligned with the TCFSD. And we've committed also $500 million. So this goes to sort of how are we going to achieve those reductions, and some of these technologies were mentioned in the previous panel as well. But in the near term, thinking about energy optimization, trolley assist, carbon sequestration. On the bottom side, solar, geothermal, wind, and hydro, and conversion. So there's some large solar and wind, battery energy storage, PPAs, the purchase power agreements. Those are all in play when it comes to that supply conversion on the bottom side of this, on this slide. And some of the, probably some of the more challenging coming from emerging technologies will be things like the electrification of larger trucks, beyond the 40-ton and 50-ton, and in doing so in partnership with various other companies as well. So looking at very specifically, though, a roadmap of electrification opportunities, and then how this will all work out towards a net zero by 2050, where Certainly beyond 2030, some of the technology which continues to emerge, which will need to come into play in order for us to achieve those emissions reductions. I'm looking at my time and I know that I'm already over time here. As I mentioned, I think with it, I really wanted to bring this up in respect of our work in the Yukon, but across Canada as well. And I think the environmental, sure, that absolutely applies wherever we operate. And yes, the social, I think it merits an emphasis here on the I, the ESG, which might be more applicable here in the Yukon, to include Indigenous peoples. We have agreements with Chundakwitchin and White River First Nation in the coffee project. We're working through the YCM process as well. And with the UFA in place, and it's extremely important from a project design perspective, from a social perspective, in working with YCM, the federal and territorial decision bodies that we're working hand in hand with our First Nations in the Yukon. And across Canada, you can see we have partnerships with 25 Indigenous communities across the country, in proximity to all of our operations, and the project recently acquired in British Columbia as well. In Quebec, actually, this past year in 2021, we celebrated our 10th anniversary of the Cree agreement, the Okanagan agreement with the Cree Nation. And just on performance, this was performance linked to our 2020 targets in Canada. So specifically from the sustainability report that year, payments to First Nations over $10.6 million in Canada in that year. Donations to communities over 2.75 million. Our water recycling rate, as well as our GHG reduction on the climate side, and that was linked to our baseline of 2013, so 13.7% reduction off of emissions to 2013. And finally, just a reminder of our coffee project in the Yukon, 130 kilometers south of Dawson City. Quickly, the location there, and just a little bit on the project basics. And I know that everyone that have joined us virtually are probably very aware of the project. 8 to 10 year mine life, the additional closure period, conventional truck and shovel operation, heap leach, waste rock storage. Employment side, estimate over 400 employees during construction, and 320 to 360 during operations, fly in and fly out, Whitehorse and Dawson City. And yeah, we're really excited about the project in the Yukon, and certainly hope that things open up and we're able to have these kinds of discussions in person rather, and really looking forward to that opportunity to meet some of you and to discuss this project and evolving ESG requirements in greater detail. Brianne, I don't know if there's time. I've gone over by about 5 minutes, but I'm happy to take questions if that's possible.
Absolutely. If there are any questions, please let us know in the chat, and John will endeavor to answer them. Looks like just one message from Dave Thompson, and that's for you to give him a call after. Last call for questions. Okay, I guess you're off the hook then.
Sounds good. I'll call you after. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much, John. It was very informative. And I would like to now introduce our next panel, Connecting the Dots with the Center for Northern Innovation in Mining, with Dr. Sheila Rolls, Associate Vice President, Strategic Initiatives. Dr. Nielsen, NSERC, Industrial Research Chair, Northern Mine Remediation, and Dr. Joel Cubley, Chair, School of Science and Instructor, Earth Sciences for Center for Northern Innovation and Mining here at Yukon University.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting us. And as others have stated, we just also want to acknowledge how much we value the opportunity to work in the traditional territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Tan-Kwatchin Council. Each of us, Joel and Guillaume and I, have a different sort of role and perspective on the Center for Northern Innovation and Mining. And what I was going to do is start off with a broader picture of the center, what it is, and our aspirations for it, and how it ties into the university, and really what the university is, where we're at with that. And then I will pass it over to Joel to speak specifically of some of our geological programs and research, and Guillaume as far as some of the work that he's been doing with the research chair. And with that, we welcome any questions that you have. So those of you that don't know, CNM was established back in 2013 through a sort of partnership between mining industry, Yukon First Nations, Yukon government, and Canada. And really its beginning was, or launch was announced back in August 2013 with a significant investment coming in from Canada and the Yukon government to build a facility to help house the center. And really at the time, back in 2013, as many of you know, like today, there were 3 producing mines. 2 of the mines, one being Alexco up in the Keno Hill district and Minto mine, were in operation at the time. And, you know, Victoria Gold was still under development. And the 3rd mine was the Wolverine mine. When we started, we asked industry, really, what are your primary challenges right now? Like, what is it that we can assist you with in order to be able to enhance and have a more sustainable industry in the territory? And at that time, the mining companies said that we have an enormous labor market shortage in the area of underground miners. And they were also requesting for us to really look at pathways for people within the territory, students, to be able to build their capacity and technical understanding beyond entry level in a variety of areas. And so this spoke to the idea of building comprehensive geology programs. It also really challenged us to say, we need to do more than introduction to the trades. We need to ensure that we have pathways for people to become journey level apprentices in the territory in trades that are really feeding and supplying industry with labor market. And with the underground mining, at the time, we had really no capacity here to be able to deliver a program. And so at that point, we partnered with University of Alaska to jointly develop a program that was designed specifically to increase entry-level training for people both in Alaska and in Yukon. And that, you know, proved to be a very fruitful partnership that we had. Things have continued to change and evolve. And as you can imagine, COVID has also helped accelerate some areas of evolution and added some additional challenges. So we fast forward today, almost 10 years later. And so, you know, again, 2022, and where are we? And we think of a lot of the discussions that have happened this morning, and we know that energy is a significant question and challenge for industry. And, you know, we question, what is the role of the university with this? How can we help advance solutions for these really key questions of our time? We know that in the past 9 years, automation and technological advancement has really accelerated. And yet we don't have a comprehensive approach as far as being able to expose potential students, people wanting to work in the industry, to some of the new pieces of technology that may become quite soon a part of their future. So that's another piece that we grapple with, where we understand that this is coming, and we really want to be able to partner with industry, partner with government to ensure that Yukon people who are wanting to work in the industry are, as best they can, prepared to be able to ladder into and secure employment that requires a greater level of technical skill. We also have a situation, and again, it's been, you know, across the news in many of our rural communities, young people have had limited access to science and math and technology training. And so we have a capacity gap. So even if we have the new technologies in place for people to be able to develop and engage it, we don't necessarily have the pathways in place for young people to get the skills they need to truly work in that field, work in those areas. And we're very, very excited to see the launch of the Yukon First Nations School Board. We see that being part of the solution. And we've really invested heavily as well in STEM camps in communities, just to, again, get young people aware of the importance of science in the 21st century and what it would be in the future. The other thing that the university is doing is we're launching the construction of a science building. And this really will enhance our capacity to expand our science program delivery, but also signal to the Yukon that actually it's something that is accessible and achievable and an integral part of our education system. Science is not going away, and it's not an elective. It's something that is really a fundamental part of who we are and what we do. The other thing that has happened in the past 9 years is, as we've referenced, we've become a university. And what does that mean? When we started, we were a community college, and community colleges play really, really important roles in addressing immediate labor market needs. And so if you need, 50 plumbers, a college can get pieces together and train 50 plumbers, and out they go. But a college is not always really looking at what is coming next. It doesn't necessarily have the research base and the frameworks and the structures in place to be able to help society, be that northern communities, northern society, northern industry, to really look at some of the specific questions that we're going to be encountering in coming years, and how do we shape, be that our programs, our services, our policies, to be able to align with those changes. And we see that is an increasingly important role for the university. And we're excited about the opportunity. We will still completely committed to addressing labor market challenges, immediate labor market challenges. But what we've done is we've expanded what our potential can do. And already through a lot of the work that Guillaume and Joel have done, and before Guillaume, Amelie, was creating the foundation, the steps in place to be able to do that. We were poking at it. And we were, I think, going beyond what a typical community college would do. But really where we're at right now, I'd see between 2022 and 2032, we will see a significant increase in research and really engagement in looking at the challenging issues of our time. Just to give you a little highlight as far as some of the network of programs that we currently have available. Joel will be speaking to our Earth Sciences program and sort of where we were and where we're at with that, as well as some of the geological research that he's participating in. And Guillaume will be able to discuss with you the work around his research chair. We continue with the heavy equipment apprenticeship programs. And so with that, a student who comes into our program, if they have employment, they will be able to access all of the theoretical levels around for their heavy equipment mechanic apprenticeship. And that is the same with welding. It's the same with carpentry. It's the same with electrical. We're really trying as best we can to make it so that Yukon people can get their full apprenticeship here and with their employment being here. And so we've seen, again, with the heavy equipment mechanic as an example, it started off where we actually kind of struggled initially to recruit people into our pre-apprentice programs. And today those programs are always full. And we, as I say, we have enough apprentices coming through the system that we're able to do the full suite of programming for them. We've also worked with Yukon First Nations and industry to develop some specific programming that is tied to some of the immediate employment needs in the producing mines and also in the placer industry. And so a year ago, we launched the Multi-Skills for Mining program. And what that came from is it was looking at almost like formalizing the jack of all trades. We knew that that was an area that we needed. People wanted and craved some additional support, and they would, and employers were telling us that it would actually help to make it so that they were more ready to go on site and work and advance from just being a beginner person that had absolutely no foundation in welding or heavy equipment mechanical or electrical. They're not apprentices yet, but they have a really kind of solid foundation. They understand those areas. We also have continued to respond to community-specific training, and those tend to vary depending on what the requests are. And so last year we were working with First Casca to do surface mining and road development in communities. We're in the beginnings of conversations with Pelly Construction and Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation and looking at some surface mining road construction training for the Roads to Resources in the Carmacks region. We also understand and are working with Minto and Alexco to introduce a Yukon specific underground mine training program that we really valued our partnership over with Alaska. It proved to be very expensive, and with COVID, the overwhelming challenges of getting students back and forth across the border made it so that we really needed to rethink this as a university. And through consideration and guidance and reflection from our governing council, which is comprised of industry and First Nations, we've made the decision to maintain the partnership over with University of Alaska, but end our commitment to a certain number of seats being offered for underground mining and really see where we can do some Yukon specific training. And so that gives you a little bit of highlight of where we're at. We're kind of in an exciting time. We're really trying to understand more of how we might be able to support students as we see the technology or see the industry continuing to evolve, especially in the technical world. And with that, I'll pass you over to Joel, who will give you more foundation in the geology and earth sciences field.
Thanks, Sheila. And everyone should see my screen now. I'm going to run through a quick PowerPoint presentation. What I'd like to do with the time I have allocated is just give everyone a snapshot about what is the health of post-secondary geoscience education in Canada? And then what are opportunities here in the Yukon? And I think, it's not going out on a limb to say that geoscience is fundamental to the health of the mineral exploration and mining industries. And therefore, all of you should have a vested interest in, what does post-secondary look like at our current date? And so just to skip forward here, there's 38 post-secondary institutions in Canada that offer earth science, geoscience, geology programming. And every year we have a meeting with all the chairs of those departments, and we submit data that, reflects our enrollment, both at the undergrad and graduate levels. And so this is just a graph from this Council of Chairs of Canadian Earth Science Departments, looking at enrollment from 1974 to present. And you can see that it looks cyclical to some extent, but there is a positive trend overall. I do want to point out, however, that since about 2015, there's been roughly a 30% decrease in geoscience enrollments across Canada. This largely reflects sort of a soft oil and gas market, and it's a little bit harder to link that to the mineral exploration and mining industries. But this is a point of concern, and it's a point of discussion amongst all of us as chairs. How do we turn this trend around? And I think by reframing and sort of highlighting some of the new applications of geoscience, that's one focus as we move forward. With this cyclicity in undergraduate numbers, I think it's also important just to look at the number of graduates coming out of geoscience programs. Since a major decline in sort of the mid 80s, this has gone steadily upwards. And the drop since 2015 hasn't actually been as extreme when we look at graduate numbers only. I would say in general, the consensus opinion amongst chairs is that geology departments do a really good job of retaining students once they're in the door. And that speaks to quality and meaningful field experiences, et cetera. The goal is, or the challenge is actually, how do we expose students to geoscience early enough, say in high school, year one of university, et cetera, to actually get them to pull the trigger and become a geoscience major. And I think a lot of the outreach and discussion that goes on focuses on younger ages and not on those high school students that we really need to capture at not a young age, but a formative age. With these declining enrollments in terms of the number of majors within geoscience programs, departments are really looking at service courses and year one intro courses to really balance the books and make their departments sustainable. And I think that this isn't necessarily a negative thing. And one of the roles that I really see our department playing is taking, say, environmental science students, renewable resource management students, giving them some geologic background, introducing them to the mining and mineral exploration industries, and giving them the tools to make their own sort of decisions moving forward. So we're seeing quite healthy enrollments in our Earth Sciences department in these sort of first year service courses, mirroring what's happening across Canada. Just with looking at demographics and gender distribution, I think this is a very encouraging graph, and data only starts around 1993. But at the BSc level, so the black boxes on this graph, we're rapidly approaching sort of parity in terms of the gender distribution. It's about 48% female, 52% male within geoscience programs. This is mirrored by PhD numbers. There's this sort of interesting plateau in MSc programs, but faculty gender distribution sort of lags this, but it is mirroring that trend in undergraduate numbers. And I would say just across Canada, the graduation rates and the success rates for female students are higher than for male students at this point in time. So, I think there's a lot of positive things to take out of this graph. The worrying thing is that this doesn't necessarily translate into equal numbers of PGOs or geologists, geoscientists in training. Only 33% of geoscientists in training are female, so that's a major drop from this roughly 50% of undergrads. Another big trend in geoscience education right now is a decrease in the number of field school offerings. And I think this has major implications for companies on the receiving end and the skills that students have to bring to bear on their projects. This is from 2015, so it's a little bit dated, but it shows the breakdown in the number of field schools that graduating students take. I personally have never had a student who has taken 5 or 6 field schools over the course of a 4-year program. That would be fantastic, but hard for departments to sustain. You know, here at Yukon University, we offered 2 field schools just in the first 2 years of the program. So we're sort of in the middle of this pack, trending towards the right-hand side. But I would say that in the past 7 years, the expectations and the number of field schools that are being offered are decreasing, and also in the duration of those field schools, and that just comes from a due to cost and liability, essentially, and the fact that there's a perception that basic mapping skills and field skills are not needed by all geoscience graduates, and so this is something that departments are struggling with a little bit. In the United States in this past year, the number of students who don't take a field school at all as a part of a 4-year geoscience degree is about 25%, so 1 in 4. And in Canada, that's significantly lower, and I think that's a very good thing. This is a very cluttered slide. I apologize, it's just a public service announcement. Generally, geoscience departments in Canada are actively rebranding themselves. And there has been a significant shift away from calling themselves geology or geoscience departments into calling themselves earth sciences departments. And this is really an optics game, but it's trying to capture more of that sort of environmental climate change space, which is fundamentally, like geology fundamentally comes to bear on that. But it has largely been captured by environmental science departments in the last 10 years. And by rebranding, departments are trying to claw that back a little bit. And so I've had numerous people here in the Yukon mining industry say, I would not hire an earth sciences graduate into a geology role. That thinking needs to disappear, because those earth sciences graduates now are coming out with credentials and experience that are basically what you would expect from a classic geology program in most cases. And I've sort of thrown up a list of both BC, Alberta, and then larger Canadian schools. One of the things that's been a great boon for universities, and we really hope to build upon in the next couple of years, is just the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and all of the press coming out of COP26, basically showing how much mineral extraction has to increase to actually meet the metal demands for green technology, and how geoscience has a role in ensuring a equitable, sustainable planet. And so departments are firing on all cylinders, trying to make the linkages between geoscience and being a sustainable citizen and responsible citizen moving forward. And I think for everyone in the room, that shouldn't be any surprise, but for many younger students, those connections haven't been made. Just 2 last slides, and I think going back to this sort of expansion of departments and the expansion of what they do, this rebranding, there's a lot of fear that I encounter on the part of sort of hiring managers saying, okay, you're broadening out into these more environmental disciplines. How does that affect hard root skills that my geology graduates have? And the short answer I would give is that it doesn't, because most departments are very strongly bound to requirements for PGO designations. And there's a great sort of handout that we all work with from Geoscientists Canada that looks at the required courses, whether you're in geology, environmental geoscience, geophysics, and there's enough sort of core components to this that I think as a hiring manager, you can be assured that students are still getting those what are I would say, traditional fundamental geology courses. And, that's important to keep in mind. Registration for geologists in training and, eventually PGO status in Canada has been steadily increasing. There's a little bit of a drop in the last few years, but that drop is almost exclusively due to less registrations in Alberta. And you can see here on the right-hand side, most professional or most GIT registrations are in Alberta. And this drops off considerably sort of as the market basically softens around 2015. So just my last slide here before I turn it over to Guillaume. Here at Yukon University, we do have a 2-year Earth Sciences program. It's a diploma program that basically mirrors the first and second year of traditional university geoscience programming. We have a block transfer with Vancouver Island University, so students can take all of their courses from Yukon U, transfer seamlessly to VIU and continue on. But there is excellent transferability with other BC institutions. Simon Fraser is a great example of this, where every course is transferable. From a teaching perspective and a student perspective, it's a fantastic environment to learn in. Our class sizes are extremely small. We get students out in the field doing, core geologic practice, basically. And so they're not green when they reach employers. And we also have a lot of capacity for excellent student experiences in the lab setting at the university as well. And I would say just the last point on here, we are getting a number of inquiries from companies who have geoscientists on staff who may not be professional geologists and need to reach back for courses that they cannot obtain online. Our courses are recognized by EGBC and APEGA. So if you have students that or employees that you want to send back for sort of additional training, then we would welcome them with open arms. So with that, I'll turn it over to Guillaume.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks to all of you for attending this presentation. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up? Yes. So my name is Guillaume Nielsen. I'm originally from France and moved up here in the Yukon back in 2012, I think. And I am the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada Industrial Research Chair in Northern Mine Remediation. And as you probably all agree, this is a way too long title that basically means that I'm a researcher here at Yukon University, partnering with the industry, and in my case, the mining industry. And today I'll talk about my work as a researcher and how the Northern Mine Remediation team connects the dot with the mining industry. So first of all, NSERC is the main federal founding entity of my research program, but I also receive funding from the mining industry, both in kind and in cash. And I was awarded with that Industrial Research Chair program from NSERC back in 2019. It is a 5-year mandate, so I still have 2 years to go. Every researcher, I collaborate with many academic entities, universities, consulting companies, and First Nation communities. I'll talk about that in a bit. But few words about my industrial partners. I have 7 active mines as partners. All are the active mines in the Yukon. So as you probably know, active is opposed to abandoned, who are often under YG or CERNAC. So one of the main questions I usually have is, do you work with Faro? So the answer is no, I don't work directly with Faro. I have projects, but not as a direct partner. And I don't work neither with Placermine. These 7 active mines are Newmont with the Coffee Project, BMC Minerals with Kutsikaya, Alexco with Kino, Victoria Gold with Eagle Gold, Selwyn Shihong with the Selwyn Project, Casino Mining Corporation with the Casino Project, and Minto Exploration with the Minto Mine. All together, they form what we call the Yukon Mining Research Consortium. So how do I work with this consortium? When we built together the structure of the NSERC Industrial Research Chair, following NSERC rules, it was decided that as a Yukon U employee, I was a neutral, independent, transparent, and apolitical researcher. Scientific evidences produced by my team must be available for public and publishable as reports or peer-reviewed publications. Continuing on how do I work with the Yukon Mining Research Consortium, we meet a few times per year all together with CEOs and most of the time environmental teams. And all together, we highlight environmental challenges they're facing that are specific to the North. And I'm the one with my team who's supposed to bring scientific evidences and answers to these challenges. 3 main research trends have been highlighted since the beginning of the chair. The first one is mine impacted water treatment by passive or semi-passive treatment, as opposed as active treatments. So as a reminder, active treatments rely on chemicals, building structures, and labor. Passive treatments rely on what Mother Earth can provide. As an example, lime treatment is the most common active treatment used in the North by the mining industry, when wetlands would be passive or semi-passive. The second trend is mine waste management, especially tailings and waste rocks. And the third one, but not the least, is mine revegetation. All the consortium actually agreed on this one. The 7 companies really said mine revegetation research is really something we need. Following these 3 main research trends, the Northern Mine Remediation team builds many research projects. We are very fortunate here on the Yukon U Whitehorse campus to have a very decent research lab to support all of these projects. And I feel also super lucky to have access to mine sites, which is a big asset as a researcher. That allows me to work with real mine impacted water, real tailings, real weather and seasonal events. And sometimes that also allows me to scale a research project from the lab scale to a pilot scale. And that is what makes this research really an applied research program. Almost all our research projects are built from the beginning, from the earliest stages in collaboration with Yukon First Nations, or as we say very often, the mine impact communities. And engaging with these communities brings a very social and practical aspect to any of my research projects. And I truly believe that mixing science and traditional knowledge, or as our First Nation department here at Yukon U calls the First Nation worldview, is the future. And it's the big step toward what we can call, after it is done, what we can call to a successful project. Going back to my work and how do I engage with Yukon First Nation communities with industrial support? It's a question I very often have. I use research as an engagement tool. I created many years ago a Northern Mine Remediation workshop that I present in person usually, with hands-on and visual tools, chemistry experiments done in the classroom to highlight my point. And I used to give this Northern Mine Remediation workshop between 9 and 10 times a year, usually in the summer, and that was of course pre-pandemic. And last year, one of these workshops went so well in Pelly Crossing at with the Elizabeth Bieber School and Selkirk First Nation students, that they asked me to create something bigger to engage with a larger scale with the community. And I created the Northern Mine Remediation course, which is a 9-module course where we cover research projects, science, social points, industry point of view, with many guest speakers, career opportunities, Yukon University programs. And we did this course, as I said, for the first time last year in Pelly. And that went so well that we are redoing it this year. I'm actually traveling to Pelly tomorrow for the second modules of this course. And we are working on extending the list of communities that can have access to this course, depending on the pandemic, mostly with Dawson, Mayo, and Wetzel Lake for now. So what I'm really trying is to spark interest for applied research projects in the mining area with mine impacted communities. Sometimes actually it works, and I have currently in my team a First Nation student I met back in 2014, if I recall, as an NND student working for me in Kino, working with me in Kino. And after going back to Yukon U in our CNIM and environmental monitoring program, and after working for the mining industry with Victoria Gold and Minto, she's now working with me in my team, and we collaborate together. And that's a story I like to remind myself often. I think I'm off my time now. That's just a 10-minute summary of the Northern Mine remediation research happening in the Yukon. I guess it's going to be time for a question now, and I would welcome these questions. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, and thanks for Joel and Guillaume for your thorough and insightful presentations. And you know, again, our closing message with all of you is to say we are here to work with industry, First Nations, and government to make it so that we can support industry in being sustainable in the territory, and really having as I guess creating opportunities to build capacity so that Northerners can fully participate in the opportunities that the mining sector presents. And so with that, if you have questions and post them, we're happy to answer. If you want to connect with us after the fact, we are here and always keen to hear from all of you. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sheila, Guillaume, and Joel for your panel today. It was very informative, and it's good to know what's happening at Yukon U. Thank you again to Scott Donaldson, Director and CEO of BMC Minerals, for your opening remarks as well. So just in closing, I will thank Honorable John Stryker, Minister of EMR, Paul Wessels, President and CEO, Western Copper and Gold, Chelsea Hamilton, Mining Engineer and Financial Assessor, SLR, with their host, Rick Horban, Principal Hydrogeologist and Northern Operations Manager with SLR, John Mullally and his talk on evolving ESG requirements with Newmont. And to all our speakers today, thank you again to our sponsors, Alcan Air North, Archer Cathro, Hummingbird Mobile Health, Cobalt Construction, JDS Group of Companies, Newmont, NVD, Pelly Construction, Summit Camps, Invest Yukon, Metallic Group of Companies, SGS, Smalls Expediting, Sodexo, Northwest Tel, Tetra Tech, Whitehorse Gold Corp, Banyan Gold, Casinos, CSR Management Inc., Ivor Yukon, Horizon Helicopters, Kluane Drilling Ltd, Minto Metals, Rockhaven Resources, SLR, AMG, Snowline Gold Corp, Terrain Geoscience Inc. We could not have put this program on together without you or offered it free of charge to our registrants today. And Nash and I would also like to thank our organizing committee for making this event a success. This year's Geoscience Steering Committee was chaired by Mike Burke, and the speaker series was a success, large in part to the efforts of our team. Carolyn Ralph of the Yukon Geological Survey, Scott Castleman of the Yukon Geological Survey, Jeff Bond of the Yukon Geological Survey, Kathy Holm with Economic Development, Jennifer Russell with EMR, Ann Lewis, again, in her capacity as our contractor today with CSR Management Consulting. Thank you so much. Again, to our partners, the Yukon Government, BMC Minerals, and thank you to all our registrants for joining us for our final session today for our Geoscience Speaker Series, where our theme, Yukon Exploration and Mining, Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, has closed out our 2021 Geoscience Speaker Series. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at this year's 50th Yukon Geoscience Forum and Trade Show.